All right, my friends, and welcome once again to another episode here of the Red Delta Project podcast, taking a fundamental approach to diet and exercise to help you to be fit and live free. I am joined today by my good friend and author of the latest book, Kaki Okumura, The Art of Balance, Living Healthier, Happier, and Longer, the Japanese Way. Some of you may remember when she was on a previous episode, and I always really appreciate her insights and information because, as I've always referred to a lot of things and the way I present things is our fitness culture. Fitness is a very cultural thing. It's just like sport and religion and architecture and food and stuff. How we approach diet and exercise can vary greatly from one cultural area of the planet to another. And when I spent some time in Japan studying abroad in college, that's one of the things that I was really surprised by with the culture shock for me was, oh my gosh, everything here is so incredibly different. I always assumed that the way that I ate and approached exercise was just the way it was done. And I really value a lot of outside or additional insights on different cultural perspectives on how to be healthy. And no one knows that better, more of in a holistic way than Kaki here. So thank you very much for coming on, Kaki. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast as always.
Oh, thank you so much for having me again. It was so great to be invited back. I love being here, and thank you for that lovely introduction.
Sure, of course. You have been quite busy since we've talked last. You have launched this wonderful book here that, dear listeners, I'll put a link down below in the description. Read it cover to cover, lots of insights. And one of the things I've always appreciated about your approaches is taking this approach to particularly diet, but also with exercise and stuff, that it's so incredibly practical for modern day living, even though they may be steeped in kind of traditional insights and values. It applies so well to how to eat well and be healthy in the modern world. Is that something that you've kind of noticed, or is that just always the way it's been for you?
No, it definitely was not always the way it's been. But I think, it's really through, a personal struggle where I've come to understand what living a healthy, balanced life is for me. And I think there was a strong emphasis on trying to write something that is practical and applicable and really accessible to everyone when I was writing this book. I think, I've lived in a few different places, and of course, when I lived in Japan, it was the easiest for me. I think you spoke a little bit about your time in Japan as well, but a lot of the times, the way I ate, the way I exercised or thought about it was really integrated into my daily lifestyle, and a lot of those things came naturally. I think when I moved back to the US from living in Japan, I found that some of those things were a bit more difficult to integrate into my life. I had to be more mindful of it, but it wasn't impossible, of course. I still practice a lot of the principles that I write about in the book, living in the US. But in general, I was really thinking about, okay, my readers, they come from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different environments, and how do I make it the most accessible to everyone? Not everyone has access to a gym or a bunch of fitness equipment or a personal trainer. Maybe people live far away from a grocery store, or they don't have the same amount of time as some people do. And so really thinking about ways where, not trying to think of those as restrictions, but what can we practice and still live a healthy, balanced life?
Absolutely. And that was something that I was really shocked by when I went over there. I was like, okay, I'm going to join a gym, and I'm going to get my usual diet foods, and I'm going to eat just like I did. And I found it was such a culture clash between the Western approach to fitness that I had, and then there was the Eastern and the Japanese approach. And it was so weird. I remember doing push-ups one time in the middle of a particularly physical, I was taking taiko drumming at the time. And here in America, it would be unthinkable to start a taiko drumming class without doing at least 300 or 400 push-ups. And we were always told, like, oh, they train so hard in Japan. They're so, disciplined out there. So when I went there, I was preparing, for this. And I got down on the floor for push-ups, and all the students were like, what are you doing? I'm like, push-ups, you got it. And they're like, get Get a drum. Why are you wasting your time with these push-ups? It's like, whoa, that's a really different perspective. And the same thing was with food as well, where like, okay, you guys are all about healthy eating, and wait a minute, what do you mean there's all this sugar in this dish, and all this fat, and all the white rice? You eat white rice all the time. Like, what is wrong with you people? Don't you know how you should be eating? And of course that was my cultural biases and prejudices coming out, because I thought that the way we did it here in the West was the way to do it.
Yeah.
And it was such a culture shock. But really, when we expose ourselves to so many different ideas, it only benefits us in the long run. Did you experience much of a clash as well, or did you kind of just flow with it?
No, I definitely experienced that clash, and I really, empathize with what you experienced, because I think growing up, or a lot of the food or nutrition education or fitness education in the US tends to be centered around like, if everything was based in science, like we all know how to eat healthy and exercise. It's okay, eat vegetables, eat fruits, exercise regularly. But what I appreciate about going to Japan and being like, oh my God, white rice, isn't that refined carbohydrate? Isn't that going to spike my blood sugar and make me crash later? But it was about taking that mindset of like, okay, we know all this like nutritional science behind white rice, but really in application, we have to think about we're human. Maybe we just like white rice and that's how we enjoy our dishes. And not everything needs to be, a high fiber brown rice or mixed wild rice sort of carbohydrate. We can still enjoy that. We just need to follow principles around moderation, or maybe we don't have like a huge portion of rice every meal, but on occasion it's totally fine. And having that very practical, like when we apply it to our daily lives, like what do we actually need to be paying attention to? That is what really clicked for me. I think, it's good to know about the health benefits of eating a particular vegetable, but that doesn't necessarily mean that eating it or not eating it is going to make or break your health. I think there's a lot of different ways to approach it. And yeah, I think thinking in more overarching terms around like moderation or balance is always going to be more practical and applicable for more people than being like, we need to do this very regimented diet to live well.
Yeah. And I certainly hear that sentiment echoed through the lessons in your book. I mean, it is called The Art of Balance, after all. Well, it is a very applicable title. And one of the things that really stood out to me throughout the whole thing was the use of just a holistic variety and variation with everything. And since then, I've like looked at my own meals and I'm like, okay, what would be different? Because I used to be the kind where I just have a huge bowl of pasta and some olive oil, and that'd be lunch. Or then I would go to the other extreme. It's like just a steak, only a slab of meat, and some wine or something, and that would be a meal. But when you have the attention, you mentioned particularly variety as a principle of fine Japanese cuisine, and it reminded me again when I was there. I was like, that's right. Like you never sit down to a meal and it'd be dominated by any one thing. You had an article that came out on your newsletter, which, dear listener, I highly recommend you sign up for, is you were talking about fried chicken. And you're like, yeah, but I'm not going to sit down to a bucket of fried chicken and that's lunch. He's like, I've got a couple pieces of fried chicken, and then I've got some cabbage, and then I got this vegetable, and I've got some rice, and I got all these other things. And it's a more holistic approach to eating, and you get more satisfying enjoyment out of it, more taste, more textures, more flavors, more nutritional variety, and you still get to have your fried chicken. And that's really been something that's changed my whole approach to eating regular meals for the past several months since reading your book.
Oh wow. Yeah, I think it's such a funny piece because when you say like a fried chicken meal in the US, a lot of people think, okay, fried chicken with a side of fries and maybe a Coke. And like that's an idea of what a fried chicken meal might look like. But when you go to Japan and you order a fried chicken meal, and I think this surprises a lot of people. When you grow up there, maybe you don't think about it too much, but a lot of fried foods the side dish that always comes with it is like shredded raw cabbage. Like if you get fried chicken, it's called karaage in Japanese, but if you get that, a lot of times it's just raw shredded cabbage, some rice, and miso soup. If you get like a pork cutlet, it's kind of the same balance. But the idea really is that with fried chicken, like, yes, you can definitely enjoy it, can definitely be part of a meal, but not everything in your meal needs to be fried for that to be your meal. And so balancing, I think raw cabbage actually really helps with digestion. I think, of course, when you have something fatty, it helps. And then balancing that out with like a miso soup and rice and trying to think of the meal more holistically makes it a lot more sustainable. And I think it also feels better for us. A lot of times, if you eat something really heavy and a lot of it, you feel kind of like heavy or groggy yourself afterwards. But emotionally, when you have a lot of different foods and variety, you just feel a little bit lighter afterwards because you're like, oh, okay, like that wasn't too much. And it still satisfies that craving of like fried chicken. So not trying to think of foods as like good or bad, but really how do I incorporate in a way that is sustainable and enjoyable for myself?
Mm-hmm. And the thing I really like about it is this isn't about limiting or a limitation. So much in our Western food culture here is, well, if you're going to eat healthy, you got to limit and you got to restrict and you got to tamper down and stuff. It's more about, okay, we got fried chicken, but what else can we add to the plate? Like what other benefits and flavors and textures, what can we add in? And it's because it's a full meal. Like, well, we don't have an infinite appetite. We're only going to eat so much, that the addition of all the other good things just naturally keeps the consumption and the portions of the fried chicken just not limited, but just in check. So we don't overconsume anything. And it just keeps us more in that balance, not by restriction and subtraction, but by addition and getting more benefit from it. And it's a great way to look at food because I've always championed the idea of, eat to satisfy. The more benefit and enjoyment you can get out of food, the better. But can you apply that type of idea to physical activity as well and ways to be active?
Yes, of course. I think even more so when you think about fitness, because for me, I think there's like a natural, like, I think everyone naturally enjoys exercise. I think there's a lot of people out there who think like, oh, when they think of exercise, like they kind of dread it. They're like, oh, that means I need to be in the gym and I need to be on the treadmill for 30 minutes or an hour. And like they kind of dread that experience. But when you really think about it, and if you look at kids and the way they see exercise, I think it really is easy to tell, but people like moving their bodies. There's a very natural, response where we feel a lot lighter, happier after exercise. And that's an immediate benefit. It's not really something that, you need to like keep doing for a whole week or a month to see the benefits of exercise. It's really immediate. But yeah, kind of going back to a point of thinking in terms of balance and what makes things well-rounded is, if you enjoy running and that's your thing, like, of course, go for it. Go to the park and do your cardio. But I think, it's not for everyone. And maybe for someone, exercise, that community aspect is really important. And so signing up for a class and meeting other people and doing it with other people. Maybe for other people, it's really just about stress relief and having some alone time. And so going to the gym alone, having that 1 hour to really just move your body in ways that make you feel really good. And I think we should also be mindful that that might change over the course of our lives, or our interests. I think what the kind of exercise we do when we're in our 20s versus our 50s is going to be different. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think our bodies change, our interests change, and being mindful of what works for ourselves and what makes us leaving that experience feeling like that felt really good. I can't wait to do it again. I think focusing more on that, rather than like, okay, like the health benefits of push-ups versus pull-ups or something. Trying to think in terms of, what do I enjoy? What am I consistent with? And what feels good after? I feel has been very important when it comes to being sustainable and enjoying exercise.
Yeah, I'm picking up on this idea of, again, I know I'm harping on this idea of variety, but two things that I've learned from your book and your newsletters and everything is, one is the way that you're talking about, enjoying the movement, enjoying things that you like to do and stuff. It naturally produces activities and physical activity habits that bring more of a variety of benefits. It's not just burning calories and losing weight or building muscle and strength and stuff. It's like there's 15 different things that I enjoy about this type of exercise. So even if I'm not feeling like, I'm not really up for burning a lot of calories, or I don't really care too much at this stage of my life about getting jacked and building a lot of muscle, I've still got a lot of other reasons why I like doing it.
Yeah.
And the second thing is a variety of different types of activity in our lives. And I don't know if this is because I've gotten older or if it's a stage of my life or whatever, but I used to be, when I was younger, high school and college and stuff, I would have like a dominant type of physical activity, be it martial arts or strength training or bike racing or something. And that was like 90% of what I did.
Yeah.
And I was always suffering injuries and burnout and aches and pains and things, or I'd get really stressed if the weather was bad or I couldn't attend class or something. There was always something that could derail me very easily. But now my approach to physical activity is so much more varied. Like I still do my taekwondo, I still ride my mountain bike, sometimes road bike, I still go do calisthenics. I went hiking yesterday. There's rock climbing, and there's so much stuff out here. There's no like dominant activity I do in my life anymore. It's just this more holistic variation of a bunch of stuff that I enjoy doing. So that idea of variety is certainly, it's just now I'm realizing this talking to you. You're so good at bringing about these little insights and making them well known, even though they were simply obvious. It's like, I didn't ever see this before.
No, I love that, and I like that you brought up the idea of, it's also, yes, there are the benefits of injury prevention when you move your body in different ways and not doing anything super repetitively. I think that does help our bodies recover, but also the psychological component of, if something derailed it a little bit, it really throws you off, and that can be like mentally very stressful. But if you're more flexible with what can encompass your life and fitness, it's like, okay, today I'm feeling kind of tired, but I do want to move my body. I'm going to go for a walk, and being able to incorporate that and focus on the benefits of, what a walk brings. It's time outside. Maybe you bring a friend with you. Maybe you're listening to a podcast. It's stress relief, feels good after. And walking's great for our bodies. But maybe on another day when you're like feeling really pumped up and you're like, oh, I really want to, I don't know, go on a bike ride, go really far and really push myself. Like that's a different mindset, but you don't need to push yourself or force yourself into that, like, oh, I need to go on a long bike ride mindset on a day where it just doesn't make sense.
Sure.
So, just focusing on that joy of like, okay, what makes the most sense for me right now, I think, is really important.
Yeah. Now, in addition to variety that I've noticed, like a common theme in your book and your approaches and stuff is also, and I love this aspect of things, is simplicity and efficiency, where it's not fancy, the food and the activities and things like that. Like I was surprised with you were mentioning there was a whole section in here on how much, you're using the microwave in Japanese cooking, just real quick heat and eat stuff. Or simple dishes. You often provide recipes. There's some great recipes here in the book. There's great recipes in your newsletters and stuff where it's like, here's 3 ingredients that are real quick and easy to combine, and they make this wonderful, delightful soup or something along those lines. So it's a refreshing thing, because again, out here in Western, it's like all extreme. It's got to be extreme. I once listened to a podcast where I listened to this guy talk for 20 minutes how he prepares his breakfast smoothie. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so ridiculously complicated. You got to be nuts. But so much of the methodology that you're talking about is make it simple, make it efficient, make it easy, less time to prepare, less things to get ready. Like it's got to be quick and easy. And usually here in our Western culture, we shun these kinds of convenient, like, oh, people want it easy, the hard way is the best way. And you're like, no. They're making things easy to prepare a healthy meal and stuff. This is a good thing. And I
Yeah.
love those approaches.
No, I think there's really such a prevalent, and it's a myth. It's truly a myth that health needs to be, it's like that living healthfully needs to be complicated or it needs to be done in a perfect way. I think like if you think about a healthy meal, it's like to prepare everything from scratch and go to a farmer's market and get organic. It needs to be fresh. And then you need to prepare it at home. And like, if you have the time for that and you enjoy it, that's great. I think there's nothing wrong with that. But the reality is like a lot of us work full-time jobs. We have other responsibilities. Having to create like 3 beautiful, healthy meals every day, that's like just not within the time or budget that we have. And so the better alternative is really like, okay, if I don't have time to boil water to boil my broccoli, like just throw it in the microwave a minute and it's done. Less dishes to watch. You're not standing over the stove. And it seems like such a small thing, but like, broccoli made in the microwave is the same as broccoli made boiling water. And it's not going to be like that restaurant perfect quality that you're looking for sometimes. But, if you're rushing in the morning, trying to create lunch for your kids or yourself, like that's perfectly fine. And I use it all the time. And you can be healthy using the microwave to cook, or like relying on things that are semi-prepared, throwing on sauces, like buying tomato sauce. Sometimes I'll create my own tomato sauce. Other times I'll just buy it. But there's really nothing wrong with relying on conveniences. Yeah, healthy can be convenient and it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. It's so crazy how you go to one type of fitness culture and you get a message, and then you go to another and it's like totally the opposite. And I, for one, when I was there, granted, this was like 20 some odd years ago, I was much younger and less experienced, and let's face it, much less mature. Not that I'm very mature now, but the thing is, I wasn't open to these new ideas. Do you find that when you're talking about things like this to especially really hard grained Western fitness junkies, that they have trouble accepting it, or is it something that is pretty easy to kind of convey and people are open to it?
I mean, it's a good question. To be fair, not everyone's open to it, but I also think that's fine. I think really the message is doing what works for you. And for some people, maybe they love that idea of like something very strict, something very structured. And they kind of like the intensity. I think if it works for that person and that's what they think is the best way to take care of their health, like there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing I can say. I think really my material is for people who may not identify with that. If the idea of like, really strict routine and really, I guess, strict ways of approaching your health is not something accessible to you or not something really applicable to the way you want to live your life, then it makes a lot more sense to think more in terms of balance and moderation, not adhering too closely to any specific rules. But yeah, I think for people who aren't open to it, like there's nothing wrong with that. I think it really is about finding what works for you. And there's so many different ways to approach your health. So yeah, I think, if you agree with it, that's great, but you also don't need to.
Yeah. And it's so easy to apply too. That's the thing that I got from so many of these lessons. This is like one of the few fitness books I've ever read. And I would like read a chapter, even just several pages, and then I'd write in like my note pad or my to-do list on my phone. It's like, okay, tomorrow go and get this ingredient or go and do this. It's so easy to take action that it's almost impossible to mess it up, versus a lot of other times you read books and you're like, oh, that seems like a good idea. And then it just sits on your shelf and you don't do anything with it. This was some of the most practical, easy to put into practice information I've ever come across. And do you find that that's also something that you find where people are just willing to adopt it and they're like, oh yeah, this is not hard at all to put into practice?
I mean, yeah, you have no idea how happy it makes me to hear that it felt very practical to you, because that was definitely one of my main goals when writing this. I think when it comes to health, I want to be aware that not everyone comes to it with a very positive experience. I think if you struggle with your weight, there are definitely self-confidence issues that come with it. If you grew up in an environment where, you felt very guilty about certain ways in which you ate or in which you exercised or didn't exercise. And so I think that barrier to entry, like making it as low as possible, was really important for me. And I think, of course, there's some people out there who will look at anything. And, if I gave a suggestion that really only took 30 seconds or a minute to implement, there's still going to be people out there who are like, this isn't going to work. I'm not even going to try. And there's really no convincing at that point. It's really about, what are you ready for? I think a mindset that I also highlight a lot in my book is this idea of, you can't really fail at something until you like actually give up. And the idea of you want to be curious, you want to explore things, I think is really important, because when it comes to fitness, it's like, any other, it's really like any other choice you might make, in that, maybe you're trying to make a New Year's resolution. You're like, I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week. And then you go to the gym, you do it for 2 weeks, and you realize you hate it. And a lot of people might give up there and just never exercise again. But the point I try to get across in the book is that, okay, maybe the gym isn't for you. There's nothing wrong with that. But there are 100,000 different other ways to exercise. You can sign up for a class, you can do martial arts, go for a bike ride, do hiking. You can just make walking more integrated into your lifestyle. And so it's really about being curious about the different ways in which you might approach exercise, and, not being so set on one way as the right way. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have that curious mindset and you're not open, like I think that's a separate issue from, trying to encourage different ways of approaching your health.
Yeah. And lastly, the third real big tenet that I wanted to touch on is, we're kind of touching on it a little now, is this idea of like just flexibility. Of there's no like, you've got to do it this way, you got to eat exactly this way, or train and exercise this way. There's so much rhetoric out there of that there's one correct way or an optimal way or all or nothing approach, and all these mindsets are basically self-defeating in the long run. But having a more open, flexible, adaptive approach where you're like, okay, well, that didn't work so well, but maybe this other thing, or I like parts of that, so I'm only going to use parts of it and not so much that. That's something you touch on a lot in your book as well, so that you can kind of do things your own way. And has that been a staple for you for a long time, or did you struggle with that too?
I mean, yeah, I used to carry very strict ideas of what a healthy lifestyle looked like. And I think that was also when I was ironically the least healthy, because, I would really get into my head and feel a lot of guilt. And that actually made it harder to explore different things when something didn't turn out the way that I wanted it to. Ideas like superfoods and, the optimal way to work out, I think, if you enjoy it, that's great. But again, the idea of being flexible has been really important for me. I do think on the note of flexibility, what has been really helpful for me is thinking more in terms of my values. So, for example, if family is a really important value to you, you can really kind of reflect on that when you make your health choices. So, at holidays, when you're spending time with family, do you really want to be stressed about the sugar content in the pie that your mom made, or the amount of carbs on the table, or that, you might not have time for your 1 hour workout session that you usually do? If my values are family, it's, in my mind, it's okay, I need to create a lifestyle around health where it's not so strictly ingrained in me eating a certain way or me exercising in a certain way. It's okay, let's think in terms of balance. on holidays, special occasions, there are no rules. I'll eat what I want. I'll enjoy time with my family because those are my values. But, if I'm thinking about balance, it's not eating like that all the time. It's, during my regular routine, it's about, okay, eating in moderation, having lots of vegetables, making sure to have time to exercise throughout the week. And it doesn't need to be like an hour-long endeavor, but at least like 30, 40 minutes. So yeah, I think a suggestion that I give a lot of people is also try and think about your values. If things like travel are important to you, that's also going to change the way you might approach eating or exercise. And so not being too strictly regimented can be helpful for people. But again, like we talked about earlier, for some people, if that's their preference, they're of course, they should of course approach in the way that feels most meaningful for them.
Of course, of course. We've covered quite a bit here, Kaki. It's very basic, broad things, but I think if we just take a few moments of reflection in our daily life and learn how to apply these things of, variety, efficiency, flexibility, we'll find the opportunities on our own for what's best and the best opportunities for each individual. Because the thing that I have a hard time with as a coach is people like, yeah, but just tell me, should I eat broccoli or not? Or exactly how much protein should I eat? Or how many sets and reps? And it's like, oh man, when you really get lost in the weeds of those details and the quantifiable metrics, we think that's going to save us. When a lot of times these basic principles and applying them into the habits we already have and letting them adjust and adapt over time is probably going to produce much better long-term results while reducing stress at the same time.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And, I think a lot of us, especially if we have struggled with our health or fitness, is that, we want like that one like magic answer, that silver bullet solution. And you're kind of like, okay, just tell me the secret and I'm going to do it. And then it's all going to be great. But I think, like you mentioned, it's not going to always be sustainable in that way. And sometimes it can actually be counterproductive. A lot of times when people come to me, if someone's looking for some health coaching, and if I'm working with them, I find that they're really stuck on trying to find that one idea. It's really, okay, well, what are your goals for being healthy anyways? Like, what are your goals? Like, why do you want to become stronger? Why do you want to become more fit? And, usually they'll list something around like, oh, I want to have more time to travel, or I want to have more energy when I travel. I want to have more energy when I'm hanging out with my grandkids. And then when you really think about that, it's like, okay, is the choice of to eat broccoli or not eat broccoli really going to make or break it for you? And I think that really helps people realize like, oh, right, like, that isn't going to change things. But what really is going to change is my ability to be consistent, my ability to practice self-compassion throughout the journey. And I think that usually helps people kind of frame themselves in a mindset that is less like, okay, what is the answer? But really like, okay, let's explore this journey together.
Amen. Man, I love that. I think that's a great point to kind of finish stuff off with. Folks, check out all of Kaki's resources. They're down below in the description. I highly recommend picking up a copy of her book. You have other resources like your newsletter, your website, treasure trove of information. Highly, highly recommend it. Any final points or points of wisdom you'd like to leave off with here, Kaki?
Yeah, I will just say, and I've touched on this during our conversation, but really practice self-compassion throughout your health journey. I think a lot of us tend to be really hard on ourselves, but if we can kind of look at it through a lens of humor when things don't go well, but also celebrating when things do go well, and really being curious about that journey, that goes a really long way in helping us form the healthy lifestyle that is will help us create the most ideal version of ourselves. So yeah, practice self-compassion, be nice to yourself, and good luck.
Oh man, I wish I had known that one years ago too. I'm the poster child of self-induced abuse through diet and exercise, and I'm sure I can be the strongest version of myself if I just berate myself in the mirror often enough. And no, not so much. As I always say, you can't build a positive result when you're coming from a negative place,
That's so
mentally,
true.
physically, or emotionally. So I think that's very good of a reminder, at least for myself, and I'll put that more into practice this week. So once again, folks, everything down below that you're looking for, that you want to know more, is down below in the description, or you can reach out to me at reddeltaproject@gmail.com, and I can forward more stuff to you as well. Check out the other interview that we did. Gosh, it was a couple of years ago, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I'll put a link, hopefully up over my shoulder here, but a link in the description to that as well if you want to dive deeper into Kaki's world and the art of balance. Kaki, thank you very much for coming on, spending your time here on the RDP podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful.
Excellent. All right, dear listener, thank you very much for listening. Again, check out links down below, and I will bid you adieu. Till then, be fit and live free.